Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025. The Supreme Court hears a case about whether parents can object on freedom of religion grounds to their children having to be part of a public school curriculum that includes LGBTQ plus characters in books. Education Secretary Linda McMahon responds to Harvard University's lawsuit against Trump administration, which has withheld billions of dollars in grants. The International Monetary Fund cuts economic growth projections for the U.S. China and most of the world in the face of President Trump's tariffs. The Dow up 1,000 points today after reports that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is suggesting that the U.S. China trade disputes could be resolved soon. Vice President Vance is in India saying progress is being made on a U.S. India trade deal to avoid tariffs. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy joins the FDA Commissioner, Dr. Martin McCary, to announce the intent to ban petroleum-based food dyes. And some Earth Day messages from the EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin and Democratic Congressman Mark Pocan. Associated Press reports that the Supreme Court's conservative majority on Tuesday signaled support for the religious rights of parents in Maryland who want to remove their children from elementary school classes using storybooks with LGBTQ plus characters. The court seemed likely to find that the Montgomery County school system in suburban Washington could not require elementary school children to sit through lessons involving the books if parents expressed religious objections to the material. The county school board introduced the storybooks as part of an effort to better reflect the district's diversity. The school said allowing children to opt out of the lessons had become disruptive. Lower courts backed the schools, prompting the parents' appeal to the Supreme Court. That was some of the reporting from Associated Press. The case is Mahmoud v. Taylor. The first attorney up was Eric Baxter. He represents the group of parents, including Muslims, Orthodox Ukrainians, Christians, and Jews. Here's the questioning from Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
I understood from the record that all that was required is that the books be put on the bookshelf. If that's all that's required, is that coercion?
Well, that's not what's required here. We know it's undisputed.
Please answer my question.
If all that's required is exposure, our clients are not contesting are not saying that would be a burden in their case.
All right, then let's go to the second step. Let's say there's compulsion to read the book out loud. Is merely being exposed to the reading of the book out loud coercion?
Well, even the board admits that the exposure could be a burden. And for example, they say at 25 note 7 of their brief that if they were exposed to pictures of Muhammad, that would be a burden that they would allow an opt-out for. And certainly whether there's a burden...
Let's go back. Is it generally that the mere exposure, haven't we made very clear that the mere exposure to things that you object to is not coercion?
It would really depend on the individual religious beliefs. Here, for example, our Catholic clients...
So what you're saying is that the exposure of children to the fact that two people are getting married is coercion? That two people of the same sex are getting married is coercion?
So our clients have not raised that objection. I suppose someone could raise that. But
let's talk about what in the portrayals, so that the mere reading or looking at the pictures, like looking at an image of Muhammad, would be coercion. Because I'm looking at the books, I've looked through all of them. They have two men, little Bobby's wedding, where they're getting married. One is black and one is white in this rendition of the book. I had one with mice. The two male mice looked identical to me. Is looking at two men getting married, is that the religious objection?
Again, it would depend on the individual beliefs of the clients. For example, many parents would object to their child being exposed to something like pornography or extreme violence. It would vary.
We're not going there.
So, Mr. Baxter, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Let me just finish this.
Sure.
One. So, just answer my question. Is looking at the pictures, is there any affidavit from any parent that merely looking at people getting married, holding hands, none of them are even kissing in any of these books. The most they're doing is holding hands. That mere exposure to that is coercion.
Our parents would object to that. They follow.
All right, now, so let's move to what I think your objection is. I think your objection is to the student guidance, correct?
Our objections would be even to reading books that violate our clients' religious beliefs. Their faith teaches, for example, they shouldn't be exposed to information about sex during their years of innocence without being accompanied by moral principles. And here we have both books that violate their moral principles and instruction that tells them that, for example, they can pick their pronouns based on the way they feel, not even just based on their gender, but how they feel from moment to moment.
Attorney Eric Baxter questioned by Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor in the oral argument in today's case, Mahmoud v. Taylor. The attorney for Montgomery County Public Schools, Alan Schoenfeld, is here questioned by Chief Justice John Roberts.
Counsel, you said that nothing in the policy requires students to affirm what's being taught or what's being presented in the books. Is that a realistic concept when you're talking about a 5-year-old? I mean, do you want to say you don't have to follow the teacher's instructions, you don't have to agree with the teacher? I mean, that may be a more dangerous message than some of the other things.
Well, there are express directives in the support materials that Montgomery County provided along exactly those lines. But, Your Honor, I would point the court to Barnett, where the kids were young, they were 8 and 10, and the court made a distinction between being required to pledge allegiance and affirm a belief in a graven image in that case, and merely being required to remain passive during the pledge ceremony and being instructed on what the pledge was, what the flag was, and what it meant.
Well, that's a particular ceremony, which I think I would sort of put aside when we're talking about the basic instruction here, read this, or this is what it shows on an issue that presents serious religious objections for the parent. So, I mean, I understand the idea when you're talking about a sophomore, a junior, whatever, in high school, where the point is you want to sort of push back on some of this. But I'm not sure that same qualifying factor applies when you're talking about 5-year-olds.
Well, so if that's relevant to the question, Your Honor, then I think that the line that we advocate between exposure and coercion is the relevant one. And there may be circumstances where, given the age of the student or given the particular presentation of information in the classroom, a plaintiff may be able to make out a case that their child is being coerced. But the court, I think, has to accept what Montgomery County sort of represents as the basis for the presentation of this curriculum. And what's in the record are directives to say, for example, I understand that is what you believe, but not everyone believes it. In any community, we'll always find people with beliefs different from our own, and that's okay. We can still show them respect.
Alan Schoenfeld, attorney for Montgomery County Public Schools, questioned by Chief Justice John Roberts in today's Supreme Court case, Mahmoud v. Taylor. Washington Post writing about the way the decision may go. The Supreme Court on Tuesday appeared poised to side with a group of religious parents seeking to pull their children from public school lessons with LGBTQ plus theme books, a significant expansion of the longstanding practice of allowing opt-outs for reproductive health classes. During more than 2.5 hours of argument on Tuesday, several justices read aloud from the text of the disputed storybooks, some of which referred to drag queens and same-sex marriage. Conservative justices repeatedly pressed the lawyer for the Maryland school system on why it could not easily accommodate the religious parents and allow their children to opt out of objectionable curriculum. That was from the Washington Post article. We covered this oral argument live on C-SPAN Radio, and we have the full video available at our website at cspan.org. Attorney General Pam Bondi convened the first meeting today of the Justice Department Task Force on Eradicating Anti-Christian Bias. That was created by a presidential executive order back in February. The Attorney General is the chair of the task force, and the members are cabinet secretaries and leaders of other government agencies. The executive order said that actions taken by the Biden administration led to anti-Christian government, and that will no longer be tolerated. Here is Attorney General Pam Bondi.
As President Trump has stated, the Biden administration engaged in an egregious pattern of targeting peaceful Christians while ignoring violent anti-Christian offenses. The president is right. Biden's Department of Justice abused and targeted Christians. Pro-life Christians were arrested and imprisoned for peacefully praying outside abortion clinics. The FBI spied on traditional Catholics in their parishes. President Biden declared Easter Sunday to be Transgender Day of Visibility. No longer. Vandalism against churches was 8 times higher in 2023 than it was in 2018. And it's at President Trump's directive, we ended those abuses at the Department of Justice on day one. We dropped 3 ongoing cases against pro-lifers and redefined the FACE Act to ensure that abuse would not continue and that American tax dollars were not used to support the weaponization of our legal system to target Christians. Just a few weeks ago, we convicted a man in Arizona for a plot to bomb Christian churches. The Department of Justice will protect religious liberty for Christians and for all Americans. We'll work closely with everyone around this table and take a whole of government approach to solving this problem and ultimately protect Americans' First Amendment rights. The First Amendment isn't just a line in the Constitution, it's the cornerstone of our American liberty. It guarantees every citizen the right to speak freely, worship freely, and live according to their conscience without government interference. Protecting Christians from bias is not favoritism, it's upholding the rule of law and fulfilling the constitutional promise. Thank you to President Trump. We have an incredible opportunity, all of us around this table, to protect the rights of all citizens from discrimination based on their religious beliefs. And thank you all for being here based on this executive order, and I look forward to doing great work together.
Attorney General Pam Bondi at the Justice Department chairing the first meeting of the newly created Task Force on Eradicating Anti-Christian Bias. The Minnesota Star-Tribune writes that Minnesota is suing President Donald Trump's administration over 2 executive orders Attorney General Keith Ellison said amount to bullying trans children. At a news conference in his office, Ellison said the lawsuit was a response to multiple threats by the Trump administration to withhold federal funding if Minnesota did not comply with executive orders issued in the first days of the Trump administration. The orders attempt to ban trans children from school sports and define 2 sexes, male and female, that are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental, incontrovertible reality. Ellison called the Trump administration's actions bullying tactics, plain and simple. That was from the Minnesota Star-Tribune. Here is Keith Ellison in St. Paul, Minnesota.
I'm not going to sit around waiting for the Trump administration to sue Minnesota. Today, Minnesota is suing him and his administration because we will not participate in this shameful bullying. We will not participate for 2 reasons. 1, they're wrong about the law, both federal and state law. 2, we will not let a small group of vulnerable children who are only trying to be healthy and to live their lives be demonized. Many of their parents are here today, and I thank them for their presence. The bottom line is, in our Minnesota, everyone is included in the circle of our compassion, and no one is out of our circle of protection. The Trump administration doesn't see it that way. They wrongfully claim that gender identity is false. They've tried to cut off life-saving access to gender-affirming care, and we sued them about that too. They're trying to remove trans kids from public life and from the things that let kids be kids. And now they're coming after Minnesota, threatening to cut off our federal funding unless we turn our backs on our kids.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, a news conference today in St. Paul. The Harvard Crimson newspaper reports that Harvard sued the Trump administration in federal court on Monday over its multi-billion-dollar cuts to the university's research funding, accusing the White House of undertaking an arbitrary and unconstitutional campaign to punish Harvard for protecting its constitutional rights. The move comes just 1 day after the Trump administration reportedly planned to cut another $1 billion in federal grants and contracts from Harvard, on top of an existing $2.2 billion cut that was announced last week. And it sets in motion a historic legal clash as Harvard attempts to combat the Trump administration's devastating multi-agency campaign to slash the university's funding in exchange for deep concessions, including federal audits of Harvard's programs, agreements to screen international students for their beliefs, and the installation of administrators who will ensure the White House's demands are carried out. That was from the Harvard Crimson. U.S. Education Secretary Linda McMahon was on CNBC today.
I want to just understand from your perspective how much you think the decision around Harvard is directly around anti-Semitism versus what the president has said on Truth Social, which is about his concerns around ideology as it relates to politics?
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for having me this morning. And certainly, the president made it incredibly clear when he was campaigning that he was not going to stand by and watch the attacks of anti-Semitism that were going on in some of the elite colleges around the country, especially Columbia and Harvard and others. And so when the Department of Education started looking into this and talked to presidents, I talked to the president of Columbia, I've also talked to the president of Harvard, and to how we could make sure that the universities were abiding by the law. And I made it very clear. I said, these are not First Amendment infractions. This is civil rights. This is making sure that students on all campuses can come and learn and be safe. And that is exactly what the president's direction to me is. And that is why we have had these funds either withheld or frozen during a period of time of negotiation. And we remain very open to continue talking to Harvard, but they have answered by filing a lawsuit on First Amendment rights. So I want to make it very clear, this is not a First Amendment lawsuit. This is about civil rights.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon today on CNBC. The New York Times has a headline, "Before Harvard was hailed a hero, it sought a deal with Trump." The subhead reads, "Harvard frantically tried to avoid a showdown with Trump administration. Now many of its big donors are pushing the university's leaders to back down and renew talks with the White House." This is Washington Today. From CNN, President Donald Trump's unpredictable tariff policy and countermeasures by America's trading partners will likely deal a heavy blow to economies worldwide, with U.S. prosperity hit particularly hard. The International Monetary Fund warned Tuesday global economic growth will slow to 2.8% this year from 3.3% last year, and significantly below the historic average. The IMF forecast in its World Economic Outlook report, the slowdown expected in the United States is even steeper, with its economy likely to grow only 1.8% in 2025 compared with a 2.8% expansion in 2024. That was from CNN. The IMF chief economist, Pierre-Olivier Goursat, was at a news conference in Washington, part of the IMF World Bank spring meeting.
We project that global trade growth will be more than cut in half, from 3.8% last year to 1.7% this year. The tariffs will play out differently in different countries. For the United States, the tariffs represent a supply shock that reduces productivity and output permanently and increases price pressures temporarily. This adds to an already weakening outlook and leads us to revise growth down by 0.9 percentage point to 1.8%, with a 0.4 percentage point downgrade from the tariffs only, while inflation is revised upwards. For trading partners, tariffs act mostly as a negative external demand shock, weakening activity and prices, even if some countries could benefit from trade diversion. This is why we have lowered our China growth forecast this year to 4%, while inflation is revised down by 0.8 percentage point, increasing deflationary pressures. All countries are negatively affected by the surge in trade policy uncertainty as businesses cut purchases and investment, while financial institutions reassess their borrowers' exposure.
Pierre-Olivier Goursat, IMF chief economist, at a news conference today in Washington. Yahoo Finance writing that U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said at a private event Tuesday that the U.S. China trade war is unsustainable and that he expects a de-escalation, according to people familiar with his remarks. No one thinks the current status quo is sustainable, Bessent said, according to a person who was in the room during the event, as the secretary cited the sky-high tariffs the U.S. and China have placed on each other. He posited that in the near future, there will be a de-escalation between the two largest economies in the world, and that should give the market some relief. That was from Yahoo Finance. At the White House today, a reporter asked President Donald Trump about the state of play between the U.S. and China and tariffs.
Mr. President, on China, your press secretary has suggested that some progress is being made. Are negotiations actively underway? And do you agree with Secretary Bessent, who has suggested that the current standoff with China is not sustainable?
We're doing fine with China. We're doing fine with I think almost every country. Everybody wants to have involvement with the United States. As you know, We were losing $5 billion a day when, during the Biden administration, during that last year, was a horror show, what they were doing on trade, $5 billion a day. And now we have it down to a very low number because we're getting 25% from the automobile industry, from autos. We're getting 25% for steel, 25% for aluminum, and we're getting the baseline of 10%. And think of it, we're losing almost $2 trillion on trade. And those days are gone. We're not going to do that again. We're not going to let that happen. We're being ripped off by almost, I don't say every, but very close to every country, everywhere in the world, just being ripped off left and right. You had no leadership. You had people that didn't know what they were doing. And we're going to turn the country around. You know, we have a very nice phrase, make America great again. That's what we're going to do. And it's going to start with trade. We're doing really well. I see the stock market was up nicely, but this is a transition period. And it's going to be a little while, but we are doing well with every country. Ultimately, we have something they want, and you have to view it that way. We have something they want, and they want very badly. And, you know, it's going to be, they're coming in, they're taking treasure, they're taking jobs when they do that, and they have to pay. And they don't have to pay if they come in and create their own jobs. You know, if they do their product here, if they build their product or make their product in the United States, we have absolutely no tariffs, and we welcome people. But we're taking in a lot of money from tariffs, and our country's getting stronger all the time because the other was not sustainable.
With China.
Are you going to play hardball with them? Are you going to mention COVID?
Well, I'm not going to say, no, I'm not going to mention COVID. I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to play hardball with China. I'm going to play hardball with you, President Xi. No. We're going to be very nice. They're going to be very nice, and we'll see what happens. But ultimately, they have to make a deal because otherwise they're not going to be able to deal in the United States. And we want them involved, but they have to, and other countries have to make a deal. And if they don't make a deal, we'll set the deal. Because we're the ones that set the deal. Scott and Howard and myself and others, we're going to be setting the deal, and it'll be a fair deal for everybody, and it'll be, I think it's a process that's going to go pretty quickly. We've spoken to many, many countries, and we're getting their views on things. You know, there are a lot of things. They have VAT taxes. They have everything you can have. Don't forget, as an example, the European Union was set up to take advantage of the United States. That's why it was set. And they've done that, but they're not doing that anymore.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office taking reporters' questions after attending the ceremonial swearing in of the new Commissioner of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Paul Atkins. Wall Street today, the Dow up 1,016, NASDAQ up 429, S&P up 129. BBC News reports that India and the U.S. need to work together successfully for a prosperous and peaceful 21st century. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said in a speech calling for closer ties between the countries across sectors. Vance, who was on a 4-day visit to India, was speaking at a program in the western city of Jaipur. But I also believe that if we fail to work together successfully, the 21st century could be a very dark time for all of humanity, he added. The vice president's remarks come a day after he met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and both countries said they have made progress in negotiating a bilateral trade deal, which Delhi hopes will help it avoid higher tariffs. That was from BBC News. Here's part of the vice president's speech.
Now, I want to be clear, America's partners need not look exactly like America, nor must our governments do everything exactly the same way. But we should have some common goals, and I believe here in India we do, in both economics and in national security. And that's why we're so excited. That's why I'm so excited to be here today. In India, America has a friend, and we seek to strengthen the warm bonds our great nations already share. Now, critics have attacked my president, President Trump, for starting a trade war in an effort to bring back the jobs of the past, but nothing could be further from the truth. He seeks to rebalance global trade so that America, with friends like India, can build a future worth having for all of our people together. And when President Trump and Prime Minister Modi announced in February that our countries aim to more than double our bilateral trade to $500 billion by the end of the decade, I know that both of them meant it. And I'm encouraged by everything our nations are doing to get us there. As many of you are aware, Both of our governments are hard at work on a trade agreement built on shared priorities, like creating new jobs, building durable supply chains, and achieving prosperity for our workers. In our meeting yesterday, Prime Minister Modi and I made very good progress on all of those points. And we are especially excited to formally announce that America and India have officially finalized the terms of reference for the trade negotiation. I think this is a vital step. Thank you. And I believe this is a vital step toward realizing President Trump's and Prime Minister Modi's vision, because it sets a roadmap toward a final deal between our nations. I believe there is much that America and India can accomplish together.
Vice President J.D. Vance in Jaipur, India, today. Associated Press reporting from India that gunmen shot dead at least 26 tourists at a resort in Indian-controlled Kashmir, police said Tuesday, in what appeared to be a major shift in the regional conflict in which tourists have largely been spared. Police described the incident as a terror attack and blamed militants fighting against Indian rule. That was from Associated Press. And President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social, deeply disturbing news out of Kashmir. The United States stands strong with India against terrorism. We pray for the souls of those lost and for the recovery of the injured. Prime Minister Modi and the incredible people of India have our full support and deepest sympathies. Our hearts are with you all. This is Washington Today. From Reuters, the Trump administration is proposing a major overhaul of the U.S. State Department that would eliminate more than 100 offices, including some working on war crimes and rights advocacy, to ensure the agency is in line with President Donald Trump's America First priorities. The plan, which Congress has been notified about, would eliminate 132 of the department's 734 bureaus and offices. An internal State Department memo seen by Reuters said undersecretaries will submit plans to reduce staff by 15%, the document added. This came up today at the State Department briefing with spokesperson Tammy Bruce.
In the reorg, we see that the Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, Human Rights, as known as J inside the State Department, seems to have been eliminated, and some of the bureaus under that is being brought under different undersecretaries. But for example, Office of Global Criminal Justice, which works on monitoring atrocities overseas, which cooperates with different governments on war crimes accountability, seems to be completely eliminated. So I'm wondering, this undersecretariat was a place where U.S. basically did democracy and rights promotion globally. Does the new State Department under President Trump no longer sees that as a mission? Is that no longer a priority?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a legitimate question. Again, we've grown used to seeing something, and then that would indicate that's where that lives, and if that's gone, the effort is gone. You know, many times during the USAID argument, I've made that argument. Just because the USAID building was going to be something else doesn't mean, or that the certain aid was cut that was not aligned with our vision or President Trump's vision, doesn't mean that our commitment to foreign aid ended. So you're right. There are going to be certain offices and certain bureaus that are going to be gone or folded into other bureaus. I would say this is one of the most important aspects of this for everyone in the building and everyone watching at home. Because you might have had a specific bureau that dealt with a discrete issue, doesn't mean because it's now folded into another larger bureau, doesn't mean that it's gone or we don't care. It means that, in fact, certain issues deserve to be considered part, not like some specialized, separate, segregated interest. Why shouldn't that interest be in every bureau, right? If you've got bureaus that, and for people watching at home, as I mentioned, I think in my very first briefing, that the State Department isn't just a bunch of people at a desk looking at the internet and people figuring out what it is they want to say to a world leader. There's bureaus filled with people who care about the country, the State Department, and are experts, researchers, individuals who are committed to a certain region, who understand it, who have also, though, the relationships with people in the countries in that region. And then they inform us, they do the research, they inform me for this briefing I go onto the screen, and it's every bureau in this building that has what we call lines, which is the information about what's happening on an issue. They tell me what those things are, why it matters, etc. So I come here, and a great deal of what I say to you, if not most, is from the body of knowledge from the people who work in this building, who are the Foreign Service officers, the career people, the civil service officers and workers who are here. So that's how it is the government as a whole is people. It is a collection of people who've gathered to further the founders' vision, and who with each election gather to further the vision of the person who leads this government. So when we think about the nature of USAID or those other bureaus you mentioned, if a bureau is gone, that is certainly all these issues are important. It means that we're looking at certainly blending in with the regional bureaus, taking certain issues away from being specialty issues, and making sure that they're in the frameworks of the bureaus so that they can be weaved in and dealt with as a whole within all the work.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce at a news conference today. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat of New Hampshire, ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee, putting out a statement. Any changes to the State Department and USAID must be carefully weighed with the real cost to American security and leadership. When America retreats, as it has under President Trump, China and Russia fill the void. A strong and mission-ready State Department advances American national security interests, opens up new markets for American workers and companies, and promotes global peace and stability. It remains to be seen how the administration's latest proposals will achieve that goal. Part of the statement from Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Fox News reports that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth pushed back against the New York Times report alleging he had shared sensitive details involving a military airstrike against the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen in a second Signal message chat that included his wife and brother, telling Fox and Friends Tuesday that the controversy is an attempt to sabotage President Donald Trump's agenda. That was reporting by Fox News. Here's the Defense Secretary on Fox.
Just 10 minutes ago, I was looking at actual war plans of things that were ongoing or pending things to happen, because that's on a regular basis on classified systems. That's my job for the war fighters, for the President of the United States. I look at war plans every single day. What was shared over Signal, then and now, however you characterize it, was informal, unclassified coordinations for media coordination and other things. That's what I've said from the beginning. At the beginning, it was left-wing reporters from The Atlantic who got a hold of it and then wanted to create a problem for the president. This is what it's all about, trying to get at President Trump and his agenda. Now, here at the Defense Department, because, Brian, I want this to be very clear, we take the classification of information very important. It's very significant to us that we safeguard it. And so when we had leaks, which we have had here, we did a serious leak investigation. And through that leak investigation, unfortunately, we found some folks that we believe were not holding to the protocols that we hold dear here at the Defense Department. Through that investigation, they have been moved on, and that investigation continues. As a result of that, everything we do here is above board, trying to make sure that we safeguard information. In this point, those folks who were leaking, who have been pushed out of the building, are now attempting to leak and sabotage the president's agenda and what we're doing. And that's unfortunate. It's not what I do. It's not how we operate. And so you've got another allegation being pushed again, not based on how we're operating around here. We're for the warfighters. We're for the president. And none of this is based in reality.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth today on Fox News. He said that the evidence of the leaks will be handed over to the Department of Justice, and those people will be prosecuted if necessary. One of the top aides let go, Dan Caldwell, says that the official reason given, leaking classified information, is false. He says the real reason that he was fired is his opposition to a possible U.S. military attack on Iran. Dan Caldwell was on Tucker Carlson's podcast Monday night.
Did you leak classified information against the wishes of your superiors to media outlets?
Absolutely not.
Did you photograph classified material and then text pictures of that material to an NBC News reporter?
Absolutely not, and I have not spoken to an NBC reporter while at the Pentagon.
Are you Do you know what you've been accused of?
No, I don't. Sitting here right now, myself and Darren Selnick and Colin Carroll, the other two individuals that were escorted out of the Pentagon, initially placed on leave and then fired on Friday, we have not been told as of this recording, one, is there what we were being investigated for? Two, is there still an investigation? And three, was there even a real investigation? Because there's a lot of evidence that there is not a real investigation.
Dan Caldwell, former senior Pentagon advisor, Monday night on the Tucker Carlson podcast. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. From Gatorade to Skittles begins an article from Spectrum News. Synthetic dyes are a common ingredient in popular U.S. snacks, but that is poised to change under a sweeping set of changes the Food and Drug Administration announced Tuesday, citing studies that linked synthetic dyes to childhood hyperactivity, diabetes, obesity, and other diseases. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and FDA Commissioner Dr. Martin McCary said they intend to phase out the use of petroleum-based dyes in the country's food supply and medications and accelerate the use of natural alternatives. That was from Spectrum News. Here is Dr. McCary at today's news conference.
Today, the FDA is taking action to remove petroleum-based food dyes from the U.S. food supply and from medications. For the last 50 years, American children have increasingly been living in a toxic soup of synthetic chemicals. The scientific community has conducted a number of studies raising concerns about the correlation between petroleum-based synthetic dyes and several health conditions, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance, cancer, genomic disruption, GI issues, as I've seen in the hospital, and allergic reactions. For example, this Lancet study conducted a randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled study on food dyes and concluded that artificial colors in the diet, quote, result in increased hyperactivity. So why are we taking a gamble? Parents, moms and dads, have also tried to raise attention to the issue. Some parents have observed that these chemicals cause hyperactivity and even aggressive behavior, and that it subsides when the chemicals are removed from the diet of the child, and sometimes even reoccurs when those petroleum-based chemical dyes are reintroduced. As I know from my experience taking care of children as a doctor, you have to always listen to the mom. Other studies have found that artificial colors that create vibrant colors mess with the child's developing brain to make ultra-processed foods more attractive, even when the child already feels full. These studies have associated food colors directly with obesity and diabetes.
Dr. Martin McCary, the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, today in Washington, announcing that by the end of next year, they would like to ban 6 petroleum-based dyes from foods and drugs. A New York Times article on this has this paragraph: the changes would have a sweeping impact on major food companies like General Mills, the Kraft Heinz Company, and PepsiCo, which have argued there hasn't been enough science connecting the ingredients with health outcomes. Also speaking today, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
And I want to commend the food companies for working with us to achieve this agreement or this settlement. And when I went in a few months or about a month ago to meet with a few food companies, I was talking with my staff about these petroleum-based dyes, and I said, if they want to add petroleum they want to eat petroleum. They ought to add it themselves at home. But they shouldn't be feeding it to the rest of us. And without our knowledge or consent. And unfortunately, we're going to get rid of the dyes, and then one by one, we're going to get rid of every ingredient and additive in food that we can legally address. One of the problems is that the industry, which all of these industries, cast a dark shadow historically over this agency. And there's so many conflicts that we are now systematically eliminating.
Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at today's announcement in Washington. Again, from the Spectrum News article, last year California became the first state in the nation to ban the 6 petroleum-based food dyes in school foods. The FDA now plans to ban from the U.S. food supply overall, saying the chemicals have been found to cause neurobehavioral problems in some children. California is one of 5 states that have passed laws banning the use of certified artificial colors in food sold to schools, including Arizona, Utah, Virginia, and West Virginia. Again, reporting from Spectrum News. Today is Earth Day, which an Associated Press story describes as an annual event founded by people who hope to stir activism to clean up and preserve a planet that is now home to some 8 billion humans and assorted trillions of other organisms. The EPA Administrator, Lee Zeldin, posted a video, along with Congressman Mark Pocan, a Democrat from Wisconsin.
From the mountains to the plains, the rivers and the oceans, across our nation's vast landscape, we all have a stake in our environment. This Earth Day, EPA is powering the Great American Comeback, energizing our economy as we carry out our mission of protecting human health and the environment. We remain committed to clean air, land, and water for all Americans. We can and we will accomplish this goal. Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. In 1969, Wisconsin U.S. Senator Gaylord Nelson founded Earth Day after a California oil spill. And since then, millions of people have been activated around Earth Day to fight for things like clean air, clean water, and the EPA. Today, the fight continues through legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act that we passed helped invest hundreds of billions of dollars into renewable energy, things like wind and solar, tax credits and rebates for just average people to be able to buy renewable energy for their families and their homes, which will eventually help save our planet. There's a lot more work to do, but celebrating Earth Day and celebrating successes that we've had here in Congress and in the recent years is one way to do that. Happy Earth Day.
Congressman Mark Pocan, Democrat of Wisconsin, and before that, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin with videos posted on this Earth Day. The White House putting out a press release under President Donald J. Trump, America is back, leveraging environmental policies rooted in reality to promote economic growth while maintaining the standards that have afforded Americans the cleanest air and water in the world for generations. Press release goes on, unlike the previous administration, which wasted billions of taxpayer dollars on virtue signaling and ineffective grifts, Trump administration's policies are rooted in the belief that Americans are the best stewards of our vast natural resources. No green new scam required. Part of the press release from the White House. The Daily Signal has an article. Administrator Lee Zeldin is flying out to San Diego Tuesday to address a public health and environmental crisis regarding sewage on the U.S.-Mexico border on Earth Day. Zeldin told reporters at a Monday morning news conference ahead of the flight, "There is nowhere more important for me to be tomorrow than on the border in California dealing with this very important public health and environmental crisis." Again, from the Daily Signal. It was also at that news conference on Monday in Washington that Administrator Zeldin got into a back and forth with New York Times reporter Lisa Friedman over stories at her paper and other places concerning efforts to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse by the Trump administration.
Thanks, Lisa Friedman with the New York Times. Where has a judge said that this is fraud?
I'm saying New York Times said it, Lisa. Lisa, if New York Times is going to write that there is no evidence.
Not true, sir. We've written that that judges have not found.
Okay, over
Is
the
that
last
accurate?
few months, Lee Zeldin, administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, has made explosive, you know this because you wrote it, has made explosive accusations against the Biden administration, accusing it of insane malfeasance in its handling of $20 billion in climate grants. Now, as a legal battle ensues over those funds, many of Mr. Zeldin's claims remain unsupported and some are flat out false. Why wouldn't you write that there is any evidence?
Could you point us to where the judges have found that there's waste, fraud, and
Oh,
abuse,
see,
sir?
it's not that easy for you, Lisa. See, because you guys are writing stories. These are your words. These aren't the judge's words. So if you want to ask the question, I'm referring to one of your stories. And this came out before the judge's decision came out. Now, if you were to, did you read the judge's 39-page decision?
Sir, with all due
Have you read the
respect,
39-page decision?
We've read the decision. We are basing our reporting on judges' rulings before then and since, and I'm just asking you, sir, where has the judge found that there is waste, fraud, and abuse?
So you read the 39-page decision supporting a preliminary injunction? What? It's okay if you say no.
Yeah, no, I've read all of it.
Okay, that's okay. Nowhere in it does it acknowledge anything that I just said. It doesn't even acknowledge it. So if the New York Times wants to say that there is no evidence, and Politico wants to say it, and Washington Post wants to say it, and others want to say that there's no evidence, see, I have a job to make sure that I don't waste tax dollars. And then for people in the media to be willing to sacrifice your own integrity and the integrity of your paper to make a claim that there's no evidence supporting it, well, I could stand here before you, and I just went through a list of how many things did I just mention? 10? I don't know what the list is. And then you'll go out and write a story saying that there's no evidence of any wrongdoing. I have a duty to make sure that we don't light on fire billions of dollars of tax dollars. And I am, as administrator of EPA, not going to stand before any member of the media and get bullied into lighting billions of dollars on fire. And then you'll continue to write these stories that say that there is no evidence, even though I could stand before you right now and just go through the list. How do you square that?
EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin at a news conference in Washington on Monday with New York Times reporter Lisa Friedman. Federal News Network reports that Environmental Protection Agency employees working in environmental justice programs will face layoffs this summer. The upcoming reduction in force will impact employees in the EPA's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights and Regional Environmental Justice Divisions, according to an email sent to employees Monday evening. President Trump's efforts to cut government spending, just one of many actions that have ended up in court. New York Times has an online page dedicated to the subject, and it reads, "The legal clashes over President Trump's blizzard of executive actions are intensifying, with new lawsuits and fresh rulings emerging day and night. As of April 21st, at least 93 of those rulings have at least temporarily paused some of the administration's initiatives." Again, that was from the New York Times. Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, the former majority and minority leader, spoke about this Monday night at the University of Kentucky.
Sir, what are the most pressing constitutional challenges that we face today, and how should conservative legal scholars address those challenges?
Well, I mean, at the risk of being redundant, the president's pushing the envelope all over the place. And that will impact the decisions of some of the people who are in this room. Like most presidents, he would like to have more power than less. But unlike most presidents, he's going to do it. And you're either an admirer of that or you think it's risky. But the courts are there to call the balls and strikes. And I have every confidence they'll decide. And there are going to be a lot of cases. I mean, there are cases being filed all over the country because of all of the dramatic steps that he's taken. That's not a problem on the tariff issue. He has the authority. I think there the measurement will be, how did it work out? How did it work out?
Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, in Lexington, Kentucky on Monday night at the University of Kentucky, an event co-hosted by the university's Federalist Society chapter and Central Kentucky Lawyers chapter, their spring banquet. Politico reports that a federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to restore Voice of America, saying the effort to gut the 80-year-old government funding news service likely violated the law and the Constitution. U.S. District Judge Royce Lamberth said the administration's rush to dismantle VOA and related news organizations funded by the U.S. Agency for Global Media resulted in the suspension of hundreds of journalists and employees. It put some overseas correspondents at risk of being deported to their home countries, the judge noted. And Lamberth said the silencing of VOA for the first time in 80 years also deprived hundreds of millions of listeners of a reliable source of news in parts of the world that lack a free press, reporting from Politico. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.